On TV, radio and online, this is GB News.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner Today on GB News, and a very happy new year from me. The kids are back at school, thank God. The decorations are at least in boxes waiting to go back in the loft, and we're revived and ready to go. Our Prime Minister is launching us into 2023 with a bold and dynamic vision for the nation that everyone needs to study maths until 18. I'll let you know my thoughts on that and his ridiculous New Year's Eve speech at the top of the show. Plus, a GB News exclusive. Former England defender Sol Campbell was all over the papers yesterday for launching a defence of his worthiness to win a gong in the New Year's honours system. Everyone wanted to speak to Sol, but he chose us, and he's going to join me before 11 o'clock to set the record straight. And my papers panel this morning, two very straight talkers, ex-Labour MP Stephen Pound and the political commentator Suzanne Evans, to discuss those Sunak maths plans, British police deserting us for Australia and looming mask madness. That's all coming up after a look at the latest news with Tamsin.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. Here's the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister is to announce plans for all pupils in England to study some form of maths until the age of 18. In his first speech of 2023, Rishi Sunak will lay out his priorities for the year ahead, including reimagining our approach to numeracy. He'll argue letting children into the workplace without maths skills is letting them down, as children's future jobs will require more analytical skills. School teacher and maths ambassador Bobby Seagull says there is a significant need for increased focus on numeracy.
One of the headline stats that the Prime Minister talked about was that there were 8 million adults in England that's 1 in 2, that have the numeracy skills that we'd expect from an 11-year-old primary school child. And that's where I think is the key failing. You might have passed an exam at 16, but 10, 12 years down the line, when you get your mortgage bill or you get like a bank statement, do you understand what's going on? So I think it's translating the math skills on paper to real life numeracy application.
Around half of Britain's railway lines are closed, with only a fifth of services running as 40,000 rail workers strike again today. RMT members across Network Rail and 14 train companies are on day 2 of a 48-hour strike in a dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Train drivers in the ASLEF union will strike on Thursday, followed by a second 48-hour RMT strike on Friday. RMT boss Mick Lynch told GB News the union wants a sensible agreement that everyone can support.
So our message is that we do apologise for the inconvenience and we are working towards getting a solution. But there are a lot of people that are frustrated. We've got the health workers, education workers, firefighters are all getting the same treatment from the government, that they seem to want to extend the agony and not give people a square deal. And all we want is a square deal for our members, and then we can create a settlement.
A British man has been shot dead in James, Jamaica. Sean Patterson, a personal trainer from West London, was found with gunshot wounds by the pool at the guest house where he was staying on Monday. Local media says a 34-year-old man is now in custody. Food inflation hit a record 13.3% last month due to soaring prices. That's up from 12.4% in the previous month. It comes as the latest price index showed the overall shop price inflation eased slightly to 7.3% in December. The British Retail Consortium says it was a challenging Christmas for many households across the UK. A leading doctor has warned toothbrushes are becoming a luxury item as soaring costs are forcing families to buy food over a toothbrush and toothpaste. In an interview with the British Medical Journal, Dr Camilla Kingdon says the state of children's teeth is alarming evidence of how the cost of living crisis is impacting children's health. Tooth decay is the leading reason for hospital admissions in England among 5 to 9-year-olds. In the US, Republican Kevin McCarthy has failed 3 times in his bid to become the next Speaker of the House of Representatives. Mr McCarthy, who has the backing of former President Trump, failed to get the 218 votes needed after being blocked by 20 hardline members of his party. It's the first time in 100 years the House has failed to elect a Speaker on the first ballot. It's expected to try again later today.
The question is on the motion.
Russia's defence ministry has blamed its soldiers' unauthorised mobile phone use for a deadly attack in Ukraine. The comments come after a Ukrainian missile strike killed at least 89 Russian troops on New Year's Day in the Moscow-controlled part of the Donetsk region. Several Russian cities have held ceremonies to commemorate the soldiers who died. The Elgin marbles could soon return to Greece as part of a landmark loan deal made by the British Library. UK legislation prevents treasures from legally being given away by the museum, but its chairman, the former Chancellor George Osborne, has reportedly drawn up a cultural exchange with Athens. That's according to the Telegraph newspaper. The 2,500-year-old marbles were taken by Lord Elgin in the early 19th century. Where they are displayed has been the subject of long controversy. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, it's back to Bev.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News. Thank you for joining me. Here's what's coming up on the show. As we welcome in 2023, around half of Britain's railway lines are closed, with only a fifth of services running as 40,000 rail workers strike for a second day. RMT members across Network Rail and 14 train companies are walking off the job today, as well as Friday and Saturday, in a dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. The union boss Mick Lynch told GB News the union wants a sensible agreement that everyone can support. And the former Arsenal, Spurs and England defender Sol Campbell has caused some outrage and certainly a lot of controversy by saying that he should have been on the New Year's honours list. He's going to join us shortly to tell us why. And of course, this show is nothing without you and your views. Don't forget to vote in the poll we've got running on Twitter this morning. We're asking you that as Rishi Sunak is going to announce his plans to fix the UK in only a couple of hours' time, the headline is that he's making studying maths compulsory until the age of 18. Is this going to fix our problems? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me @gbnews to let me know what you think. But first of all, let's have a look at your non-elected Prime Minister delivering his New Year speech to inspire and galvanise us as we stare down the barrel of another frankly terrifying year. Here he is, talking down to us rather nervously, like a supply teacher to a class of 4-year-olds.
I think there are a few things. First is pride. I just want people to feel proud of being British, proud of their town, their community that they call home, and proud of their leaders, actually. And that's about restoring trust in politics, and hopefully we can make progress on that.
Even he doesn't sound like he believes it. The hopefully was a bit fingers crossed, eh? And proud? Proud? Of literally what? This former great nation, still full of wonderful, warm-hearted British people, has an education system with 100,000 missing children who never returned after lockdowns, an NHS with unprecedented waiting lists, excess deaths reaching more than 1,000 people per week last year, with nobody apparently bothered by that. We have trains that don't run, energy and petrol companies ripping us off, and eye-watering food inflation. So go on, Rishi, tell us from the heart, with passion, how you're going to fix it.
Assurance. I know people are anxious at the moment and they want relief, they want peace of mind that things are just going to be okay. And that is first and foremost about reducing inflation and energy bills, which again, we've made a good start on, but there's more to do.
Do you think? Yes, we want reassurance, but not through poxy videos shot in your front room telling us that we want reassurance. What are your plans? What exactly are you going to do? What exactly are you up to? You were Chancellor of the Exchequer when you found a magic money tree and gave away taxpayers' cash without enough checks and balances. You created a stay-at-home and get paid to do bugger all culture, which has resulted in 9 million economically inactive people, 500,000 of which are lost, depressed, under 24-year-olds with no idea of what to do next. But don't worry, richer than the royals, Rishi knows just what we need. Watch out for the revealing, self-conscious swallow.
And then the last one is fairness. I think everyone wants to live in a country where things feel fair, that if you're working hard and doing the right thing, that is going to be rewarded and other people aren't able to beat the system and break the rules and get away with it.
Oh, you mean like this pair? Sarah and Richard Stout, pictured on their Christmas Caribbean holiday after making £2 billion in NHS PPE contracts, £2 billion, through their family business, which previously made less than £1 million. According to the Daily Mail, they got a tip-off about a deadly virus before the pandemic took hold. And now they've just bought a Caribbean villa for £30 million and an English country house for £6 million with our taxpayers' money. Or maybe Sunak was referring to Baroness Moan, facing allegations right now of a £29 million kickback for similar COVID contracts. Why doesn't our Prime Minister sound more outraged about this? Well, maybe because these figures are small change. His personal wealth is £730 million. His wife is a billionaire. Sunak goes on to talk about building a better future for our children, but he doesn't ever tell us what that looks like. Oh, except today we're going to hear that they need to do more maths, apparently. He never tells us anything deeper than platitudes and cliches about pride and fairness. So we have to read between the lines. We know how excited he gets about artificial intelligence, track and trace systems, and in the past he's keenly advocated for a centralised digital banking system, possibly with behavioural conditions attached. Explanations of these huge, swirling issues today, to give us time to debate the pros and cons of a Sunak-designed future, are what we need. That is what a Happy New Year would look like. Right, let me know what you think, won't you? GBviews at gbnews.uk is the email. I will be checking my inbox and I'll be getting to as many of them as I can throughout the show. Now, the chief negotiator of Network Rail has raised hopes that an end to rail strikes is on the horizon, saying that a deal with the RMT is now within touching distance. It comes as the country enters a second day of widespread strike action, with 3 more on the way. Our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, joins us from Wolverhampton Station now. Good morning, Jack. Lovely to see you. What is the latest in the Midlands at the station there?
Well, there's a lot of disruption, to be perfectly honest. About 1 train an hour is running for a lot of the local services and local journeys. There are some trains 2 per hour which go via Birmingham New Street into London Euston. So there's still some services running, but it is disruption compared to what we usually see here. In fact, just inside the station, there's a whiteboard that says, due to industrial action, there are no trains going between Wolverhampton and Shrewsbury stopping at the local station. So those passengers wanting to go via that route are going to have to find alternative arrangements. So you can probably see around me there's a lot of taxis parked up here, and speaking to some of the taxi drivers this morning, they say that these train strikes are almost killing them because it's another day now they've got essentially no business because nobody's using the trains. People are staying away from the trains and getting alternative arrangements if they can, and if they can work from home, they'll work from home rather than commute into city centres like Birmingham where their office might well be. We don't really know where this is going to end. Of course, we heard, as you just mentioned, that Network Rail are hopeful that a deal is close with the RMT. They're meeting Mick Lynch later in the week and next week to try and sort out something. The first deal that Network Rail, their best and what they said was their final offer, was a 5% pay rise backdated for 2022 and a 4% pay rise for 2023. That was rejected by the eligible RMT members by 55%. So what wiggle room the Network Rail believe they might have, we don't really know. Mick Lynch has never really set out as from the RMT what kind of figure in terms of a pay rise and is actually acceptable to him to be able to put forward to the members. We know, of course, he has strict red lines on things like driver-only trains, removing ticket offices from stations across the country, and particularly that issue about guards on trains because of things like safety. That he says that is not something that he's not going to negotiate over, but it's something that Network Rail and they tried to slip into the deal at the last round of negotiations. So whether they're happy to remove that from the deal, we don't know. But of course, they're saying that a deal looks like close. So we'll have to see what happens, but the disruption here is going to continue. This morning, Paul Novak, from the Trade Unions Congress, has called on ministers to open pay negotiations amid the rail strikes. In a letter to the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, he said that public services were in crisis after years of underfunding and understaffing, but the government's saying they can't afford the pay rise in line with inflation. So we'll have to see what happens from the negotiations. Mark Harper saying yesterday, get off the picket line, come round the table. It seems like that now is going to be the case between the RMT and the government, and this dispute might well be ended quite soon. OK, thank you, Jack. Let's hope so. Do let me know. Tomorrow's being called... what's it being called? Something Thursday. Tragic Thursday, because of the strikes that will be going on. About 10% of trains will be running tomorrow. Let me know, won't you, if your Christmas and your New Year plans were all disrupted from a family point of view because of the rail strikes. I think it's just caused chaos. Well, I'm talking now to Lisa Minot, travel editor at The Sun. Good morning, Lisa. When you were listening there to Jack's assessment of the situation, it sounds relatively bleak. Do you think there's a little more light at the end of the tunnel, that a deal will be reached now that we've made it through to 2023?
I think it really, really does just depend on the unions and the government both moving from their very intractable positions they're in at the moment a little bit towards the centre ground. We're not seeing that coming from either side. The government are saying that they insist that any kind of pay award does have to come with this, alterations to the actual sort of conditions that the railway workers are working at the moment. They say that the railways have to be modernised and they're a very different beast to the one they were pre-pandemic. And then you have the unions on the other side, very, very, not going to move at all, not going to go forward and say that safety is urgent and that their members working conditions are really important. So it's about more than just pay. I think if it was just about pay, things might have moved on, but we've got two sides who are sitting very much in different camps and not moving forward. Mick Lynch has already said that should they not come up with any kind of resolution next week in the latest round of talks, they've got a mandate to strike up until May, and it could actually be that they then take another vote to have further action all the way into the rest of this year.
Extraordinary. One thing that it's easy to forget, Lisa, and I was reminded then when Jack was talking, actually, is that the effects of this on other transport workers, the taxi drivers, the bus drivers. I was driving in this morning. The roads in London were nearly empty because I think a lot of people are just deciding to work from home on days like this. As somebody that works for an influential newspaper, The Sun, how do you handle that with your readers? Because there's a fine line, isn't there, between supporting the workers but also supporting your readers who want to get to work?
Yeah, I mean, and that is a real issue because, yes, as you say, there has been, a decent amount of sympathy up until now for the railway workers because some of them are very low paid and do deserve a pay rise. They kept the railways running throughout the pandemic, but at the same time, this is now starting to hit people in their pockets in a way that they weren't expecting it to. If you're working in the hospitality industry, it's had a real impact on the hospitality industry, the entertainment industry, and as you say, those and other forms of transport. And after a while, I think it does begin to get very wearing. People are having to make, sort of real changes to their lives in terms of how they get to work, how they commute, perhaps especially in and around London and other major big cities. So there is going to still be sympathy, but at the same time, they want a deal struck so that we can get back to having a sort of, a relatively easy way to get into the new year.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of public support, Lisa, there's a new YouGov poll out today that says that 49% of people in the UK are now opposed to the strikes. So it sounds like the RMT and Mick Lynch are just kind of clinging on to the majority of people in this country, but that won't last forever, will it?
No, it won't. But all you can hope is that they do manage to put a deal on the table that will go out to the RMT members and be approved. If you remember the last deal, when that was put on the table, a third of the union workers did actually accept it. It was, sort of 33% said yes, 66% said no. So if they can get past that interaction and get past this piece where actually at the moment the working conditions are the real issue and what's going to happen to how their working conditions are going to change, working on Sundays. If they can get past that, then there is a possibility that there's a deal on the table that the union members will want to take.
OK, thank you so much, Lisa. Lisa Minnow there, travel editor at The Sun. Let me know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Do the railway workers still have your support? Don't forget also to vote in my Twitter poll this morning. I'm asking you, with Rishi Sunak announcing his plan to fix the UK, the headline is that he's making studying maths compulsory until the age of 18. Is that going to fix your problems? Well, funnily enough, around 90% of you so far think not. As always, send me your emails, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. Now, after the break, I'm going to be welcoming my panel into the studio for the first time this morning. I'm going to be joined by cheeky chappy, former Labour MP Stephen Pound, and the very opinionated political commentator Suzanne Evans. So don't go anywhere. Now, though, a quick break.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10:22. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. My guests are here, I'm delighted to say. I'm joined by political commentator Suzanne Evans and former Labour MP Stephen Pound. Stephen, good morning. The highlight of my Christmas was your House of Commons chocolates on Boxing Day. Thank you very much.
The highlight of my new year is having you say that.
I've had those chocolates, they're fab.
I'm easily bought, honestly.
This is product placement.
Right, Stephen, let's start with the front page of The Guardian this morning. Now, this is telling us that Rishi Sunak is in denial regarding the NHS crisis. Is he?
I don't think he is. I think that what the doctors actually says is the Royal College of Emergency Medicine. They actually said he's delusional. And I think that the issue here is that he is deluded about the future of the NHS. Look, I think we come to the stage now, really and truly, when we realise that our model, which is pretty much unique in the world, I think, except possibly for Cuba, is ideologically superb. Emotionally, maybe philosophically it's great, but it simply isn't practical. Now, we've actually got a window of opportunity. The bizarre thing is we got a very, very warm winter. Now, at the moment, we've got this double whammy of flu cases, but the flu uptick is normal at this time of year. And there is some long COVID ones. But really and truly, if we come out of this into a fairly warm spring, I think it really, really is the time we stand back and say, look, as Wes Streeting said, this is a service, not a shrine.
It feels like that, doesn't it, now? I think we've reached that tipping point, have we, Suzanne? Even those of us who hold it so dearly in our heart, who have seen our loved ones literally lives saved by the NHS.
Yeah, I mean, it's well overdue for reform. The problem with the NHS is that it's been this political football, so each side has tried to claim it for its own and claim that it's been managing it better than the other. Labour and Tory, Labour and Tory. And none of them have actually had the bottle to grasp it and say, look, it's not working anymore. When it was founded in the 1940s, there were, much fewer people in this country. We didn't have the medical advances that we had. And it's not working. It's not fit for purpose anymore. It has got to be reformed. But one thing I will say, this idea that now Rishi Sunak is delusional because the NHS is in crisis. The NHS is in crisis every winter. I had a quick look at some 2018 headlines before we came on air, Bev, and they're almost identical to today's. The Daily Mail, winter crisis cripples NHS. Now the NHS tells us don't get ill. The Telegraph, NHS tells hospitals to cancel all routine operations. The Mirror, Britain in the grip of
This is 4 years ago.
This is 4 years ago, before the COVID pandemic, and frankly, nothing has changed, to quote a once famous Prime Minister.
4 billion quid a week it gets. Steve.
Well, it's over 80 billion a year, but look,
it's huge amounts.
There are times when throwing money at the NHS works, and it worked in 2000. Throwing money did actually work. It brought down the cancer waiting list. The real problem we got, firstly, as was mentioned, when the NHS came into being with me in July 1948, it was predicated on a couple of things. Don't forget, the original Beveridge report was 5 different things. It was supposed to end, ill health, idleness, sloth. The idea was that the NHS would actually fade away after a while because people would be so healthy. But it was predicated on a couple of things. Firstly, women didn't work. So women stayed at home and looked after the elderly and the infirm. Secondly, men left school at 15, worked until they were 65, spent 10 years down at Fulham watching some football or doing whatever they do, and then died at 75. And then in 1953, only 5 years after the NHS, you had the Gillibo report, which said, look, it's unsustainable. And they took eye surgery, optical, dentistry out of the NHS because they couldn't afford it. So it's
So it hasn't moved with the times, has it, when you put it like that?
But it has in
hasn't
some
moved.
ways.
I mean, I don't think the solution is that we should women should all give up work and look after our elderly.
I was wondering if you were going to come up with
Sorry,
or blokes
it's
die when they're
disappointing.
I'm not 75 yet.
I don't think you were suggesting that.
Yeah.
But I see what you mean. You're saying these massive cultural shifts in the way that we live our lives and how we choose to spend our time is so disproportionate. I mean, the irony that the NHS was there to make us fit, and now we have had an obesity pandemic for at least 3 decades. We've been living in that. So,
well, I kind of dispute that. I think the way in which the obesity figures are calculated is slightly... It's like a distribution curve. So there's always going to be somebody that's labelled overweight. And I actually happen to think that BMI is one of the worst
I agree.
indicators you can possibly
but you
have.
know what?
But, you know, we've had 10, I think, top-down reorganisations of the NHS since 1973, and none of them have really worked. Its size and scale now is massive. It's the biggest employer in the country. I think just...
Biggest employer in the world, the NHS.
In the world,
the third biggest employer.
Right.
The Indian Railways is the first, and the Chinese Army is the second.
Is that right?
And we're the third biggest employer in the world after India and China.
It's definitely the biggest in Europe. It is the biggest employer in Europe. Well, let's see what he has to say today. Like we say, Rishi Sunak's making this speech this afternoon to set out his vision. And if he doesn't go hard on the NHS, I think a lot of people are very disappointed because it is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds.
Will he grasp the nettle? I mean, he's come up with some good ideas already. I mean, I think there's nothing new about having community pharmacists get more involved in diagnosis and prescription. And, you know, and let's face it, that's where he comes from. So, but, you know, there's things like that we can do. But ultimately, what we really need is to get rid of people who are blocking the beds in the hospitals. We need to go to the rehabilitation units, the different units that we used to have. We used to call them recovery units.
Yeah.
And where people would come before they went. At the moment, after you've had your operation, you should not be occupying a hospital bed.
And bring back the 40,000 care workers who got lost their jobs over vaccine mandates, and then we can get the people moving back into the care system.
Well, that's the NHS sorted.
Well, we've done that, fixed. You know where we are, Rishi. Right, let's not return to mask madness. Oh, really? I feel very differently about this. How about you, Suzanne Evans?
I'm sorry, I'm going to be absolutely blunt here, but anybody that thinks masks are going to solve this or even help this crisis is a nutter. I'll be that blunt about it. You only have to look to China, where they have been masked even before day one of COVID. They were all wearing masks out there all the time. And look at what's happening in China. You had something like 250 million cases in the first 20 days of December when they started to lift restrictions. Masks don't work. It is self-evidently obvious to anyone with half a brain cell that they don't work. And I was quite pleased to hear MPs pushing back against this.
Yeah.
Desmond Swain, who was a great sort of champion, I think, of the anti-lockdown movement, said, you know, they're one of the more dystopian aspects of the COVID restrictions. And let's not forget that we made children wear these filthy rags at school because adults were frightened.
Absolutely.
And that's the bottom line. Masks are only to try and stop the fearful being afraid. They do nothing to stop the spread of COVID.
The formerly Public Health England, of course, which rather menacingly got called the UK Health and Security Agency during the pandemic.
Do what we are telling
without
you.
enough fuss made about that. Well, they are the ones who are saying that renewed COVID-style restrictions, it could include face coverings this winter. Stephen, what do you think? I don't go quite as far as Suzanne. I won't wear one. I haven't worn them. I have stood up in shops and had arguments with people about the fact that they're trying to make me and my children wear them. However, I do think I won't judge somebody if they feel happier, if they're wearing, if they feel OK in it. You know, you do you, hon, I'll do me, as we say.
It's almost impossible to wear one if you wear glasses as well.
Well, exactly.
That's the thing. But interestingly, a lot of people from China and Japan were wearing them before COVID.
And I know, and I don't want it to be normalised here.
That's the point. But when you say about Desmond Swain, I always remember when I knew him, I used to see him in the morning at our Bible study class in Parliament, and he'd come straight from a morning swim in the Serpentine. He'd go for a swim every morning.
Fabulous.
Yeah, mad.
What a heroine.
Oh, but great for you, though.
But I'll take my hat off to anyone who can do that.
I have to say, you can only admire a person who does that. But look, I think in some ways it's good manners. If you've got a cold and you're sneezing and you're coughing, you and I, all three of us, would cover our faces, would we not?
Well, yes. And it didn't used to be good manners. It didn't used to be good manners, so why is it now?
But because now we know that airborne distribution of...
We always knew that airborne viruses were airborne.
Obviously we didn't, but I mean...
Of course we did. We always knew that you could catch a cold.
I suppose the clue's in the name,
isn't
it? Yeah, but nowadays, you know, people whip out a handkerchief and cover their nose if they sneeze.
But they always did that. They just didn't wear a mask on their face to walk around.
I don't know if everybody did. I can remember plenty of people sneezing on the tube in the morning. You know, I've lived in this city all my life.
And we didn't die.
No, not in numbers.
It was OK.
Like, that was OK. I'm sorry, I don't buy this, Stephen. You sneeze into a mask, so you have a lump of you-know-what stuck in your mask. What
Mucus.
Take it off to... I mean, come on, a handkerchief is much better. And it doesn't stop the spread.
Actually, a tissue that you put in the bin is probably
better. You've seen those videos. I've worn masks, when I'm doing intensive building work and I've got dust everywhere. You take it off and it's still on your face, and that's dust, massive great particles.
But the key thing here is immunisation. I mean, one of the, in fact, probably the greatest success of the whole COVID horror in this country is Kate Bingham's work in actually rolling out the vaccine. We are world leaders.
I think the science might be slightly controversial on that as well now, Stephen.
I think we had a pretty good result in this country, and I am actually in the target group for people who are likely to get it. And I woke up one morning, made some toast, and I couldn't smell the toast. And I thought, hello, what's going on here? So I went into the toilet and did the old spray, couldn't smell that. So I thought, I'll do the ultimate test. Went upstairs, got the wife's Chanel No. 5, tipped it out, couldn't smell a thing.
You tipped out your wife's Chanel No. 5?
Well, I was just trying to work out whether I got my sense of smell.
That's
Unfortunately, I lost
Stephen.
Well, you wouldn't be able to do that if you were wearing a mask, would you?
The thing is, I had it. I almost lost my consciousness when my wife caught me at it. But the point being that I had it, recovered, immunised, no problem since.
Well, statistically, you would have been OK anyway.
Yes.
You would have statistically been OK, even at your senior age.
Oh, thank you, my dear.
Now then, after the break, I'm going to be joined by former footballer Sol Campbell. He took to Twitter detailing the reasons why he should have made the New Year's honours list. It rubbed a few people up the wrong way, but he's going to be joining me to give his side of the story. That's after the morning news.
Good morning, it's 10:33. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB Newsroom. Here are the headlines. The Prime Minister is to announce plans for all pupils in England to study some form of maths until the age of 18. In his first speech of 2023, Rishi Sunak will lay out his priorities for the year ahead, including reimagining our approach to numeracy. He'll argue letting children into the workplace without maths skills is letting them down, as their future jobs will require more analytical skills. School teacher and maths ambassador Bobby Seagull says there's a significant need for increased focus on maths.
One of the headline stats that the Prime Minister talked about was that there were 8 million adults in England, that's 1 in 2, that had the numeracy skills that we'd expect from an 11-year-old primary school child. And that's where I think is the key failing. You might have passed an exam at 16, but 10, 12 years down the line, when you get your mortgage bill or you get like a bank statement, do you understand what's going on? So I think it's translating the math skills on paper to real life numeracy application.
Around half of Britain's railway lines are closed, with only a fifth of services running, as 40,000 rail workers strike again today. RMT members across Network Rail and 14 train companies are on day 2 of a 48-hour strike in a dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Train drivers in the ASLEF union will strike on Thursday, followed by a second 48-hour RMT strike on Friday. Food inflation hit a record 13.3% last month due to soaring prices. That's up from 12.4% in the previous month. It comes as the latest price index showed the overall shop price inflation eased slightly to 7.3% in December. A leading doctor has warned toothbrushes are becoming a luxury item as soaring costs are forcing families to buy food over a toothbrush and toothpaste. In an interview with the British Medical Journal, Dr. Camilla Kingdon says the state of children's teeth is alarming evidence of how the cost of living crisis is impacting children's health. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning, it is 10:37. This is Bev Turner Today on GB News. It is so nice to be back with you. Let me tell you, I've pretty much drop-kicked the children out the door to school this morning. You've been getting in touch with your views on Rishi Sunak's plans to make us all do maths until we're 18. Josh says, when I was at school, I did not realise the importance of maths. I use maths every day for my work, for technical stuff, the important stuff of working out pay, time off and retirement planning. And Craig says you don't need to do maths until 18 to understand. You're a lot poorer, unable to afford basics, you can't get on the property ladder, that food costs are up more on so many items and that electric and gas prices have spiralled. Yep, I agree with you both. Now, listen. Former Arsenal and England Tottenham defender Sol Campbell has posted a list of his football achievements on Twitter. He wasn't named in the New Year's honours list again, and some of the reasons were being part of the invincible Arsenal team, which went 49 games without losing, and pointing out that he was the first black English-speaking player to score in a Champions League final. Plus, he stood up for racism in football here and abroad. Finally, he went on to say that at one stage he was pound for pound the best defender in the world. Well, it caused a huge reaction online and in the papers. Everyone wanted to talk to Sol, but he chose us. He joins us now exclusively on GB News. Sol, very good morning. Great to
Hello.
see you.
Hi.
Good to see you, looking somewhere lovely. Now, did you expect, Sol, that your tweets would cause such a fuss? And does it suggest that you might have a point?
I think for me, when it comes to honours lists, if it comes to like a popularity kind of contest, there's a lot of people unpopular who have Sirs, OBEs and MBEs. And if you look at what I've done and what I've gone through playing football in a consistency over the course of 2 decades under severe pressure in football, in this football sense, I'm up with some of the sporting greats of our country. I'm a proud, Englishman. I've done a lot for football on and off the field, for racism, and also I'm not even talking about the records I've acquired playing football for my country and domestic, Tottenham and Arsenal. So for me, I'm up with the rest, with all of them. I don't know why I get overlooked on these kind of occasions. I'm not the only sporting great that has been overlooked, but for me, I'm seeing other people kind of get all these gongs and these accolades, and it's special. I think for me, it'd be an honour for me to have a Sir, OB or MBE for my the sport I've committed to for over 2 decades.
Why now, Sol? Why did you choose to make this point now? Have there been many years when you've sort of sat for the phone to ring at New Year and you're thinking, this year's going to be the year, and then it got to 2023 and you're like, oh, not again, right, I don't care anymore, I'm going to make a point?
Yeah, for me, when you look at it, like, when I first, when I retired over 10 years ago, just before that, I won the FA Cup with Portsmouth. I mean, I'm nearly like retired and I'm winning FA Cup. And when you look at how so many other teams have tried to do that and spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds. I go to Portsmouth and everyone's thinking, well, you finish there and you win the cup. But not only that, off the field stuff. I had a charity, helping out disadvantaged kids from all over the place, all over London, helping them kind of go to sporting events. So if you're looking at what I've done off the field, I've done a hell of a lot for just a black man and a proud British and English man going forward. I've done a hell of a lot for this country. I've been an icon for this country. Abroad, people recognise me for what I've done as a footballer. It'd be nice if I could have something to say, hey, I've been recognised in my own country.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. You got a lot of stick, Sol. You'd be the first to admit this. There's a lot of people saying, this is very arrogant, or you should wait for somebody else to suggest you. What's your response to that?
I think if you have that situation, then I'll be waiting forever. Yes, there's protocol, there's ways of doing it, but if you keep on getting overlooked, I mean, if you look at just look at what I've done for football, just football, the accolades, the hard work, the commitment, the consistency of playing at the highest level under extreme pressure in football. And then you see other people, from whatever backgrounds, especially icon backgrounds when you come to sporting, some of them have, not the kind of straightforward pass or backlog, and all the resurrected themselves and all of a sudden maybe on TV a lot and yeah, there you go, OB or MB or Sir. Now, yes, if you're quiet in the corner, if no one else is talking about it, I'm not the only one. There's other sporting greats who are kind of missing out as well. But I guess I'm just saying for myself.
Yeah, I suppose maybe it's a bit more complicated in football. I mean, I was looking at the list from this year, even from the Lionesses, so the women that won the Euro 22. Do you think all of the squad should have got gongs because only 4 of them did? I don't know how you can differentiate, really. I guess the goal scorers or whatever, but that was such an amazing achievement to be the first at anything. Surely the whole squad needed rewarding.
Yeah, I'm sure, yeah. And why not? Because you don't know when it's going to come around again. And I think sometimes people overlook the quality of football. The ladies done an amazing job in the summer. So, some people just overlook and just look at the certain players have scored the goals or all get their, get them kind of inches in the magazines or the papers or the internet. But, they all deserve it. They all deserve it.
Why
so for me, I'm just saying...
Sol, let me just ask you this. So why do you think you were overlooked or have been overlooked?
No, I get it. Sometimes football, maybe 20 years ago, there was I can understand maybe when you go into, say, athletics, it's kind of singular sport and everyone can see you. And I get, and so some of the guys have done amazingly and they've got, accolades and it's great. But maybe as a football, as like you look as a team, people certainly kind of just pick out 1 or 2 players and those are the guys, or the England team, those are the guys who deserve it in their eyes. But when you look at the amount of games I've played, over 500 games, played 2 decades in the Premiership. I was part of the Arsenal team that beat a record that stood for over 100 years. As I said before, I was the first black captain to lift the cup. If that's not iconic enough, at Wembley, the first black player to score for England in the World Cup. So, and then the first black player to score in the Champions League final for England, English-wise. So, if that's not iconic moments or things that actually say, wow, that's amazing. That's not happened before. It's not that I'm not the second or the third. I'm the first person. So, I do deserve something.
Sol, do you think race has played a part in it? Can I ask you that question? Because we're in a very different place now than we were maybe 20 years ago when you were at the top of your game and you were a household name, you couldn't walk down the street. Do you think there was a bit of discrimination maybe at that point that there just wouldn't be today?
I think it's opened up hell of a lot now, for sure. I think for me, back in the days when I was maybe moved from Tottenham to Arsenal, there was too much noise going on. I had to deal with a lot of stuff there. I had to be under pressure. I had homophobic stuff come in as well. I had racial kind of slurs to me as well. So I think it all got lost. All got lost in the noise, and everyone forgot how many records I broke at the time. I still have a record of 56 games in the Premiership, not losing, not home and away. I did that 20 years ago. That's not like, it's Mickey Mouse kind of thing. That's consistency of another level.
Well, Sol Campbell, you've put up a very good defence. See what I did there? Of yourself and and your ambition to be recognised by the nation. I think you've done a brilliant job. Lovely to see you. And if you want to come into the studio anytime, I will have you going through the papers with me, Sol. I would love to see you. Thank you so much, and Happy New Year to you, mate.
Love it.
Take care.
Happy New Year. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Sol.
Bye.
Right, let me know what you think. Does Sol Campbell deserve a knighthood? I mean, he's passionate about it, isn't he? gbviews@gbnews.uk. OK, we are 4 days into 2023, and many of us will be working hard to commit to our New Year's resolutions. I'm not. But the question is, how many of us actually stick to them? Our North West of England reporter, Sophie Reaper, has been taking a look at some of the ways that people are kicking off their New Year's pledges.
Kicking off the new year with a bang. As we settle into 2023, millions of us will attempt to maintain our chosen New Year's resolutions. Hitting the gym is always a popular choice. But what about something a little bit different? Other popular New Year's resolutions are things like reducing stress and improving mental health. And what better way to combine those two things than with a bit of yoga? Especially when you involve puppies. You've heard of downward facing dog. Well, this is puppy yoga.
When we practice yoga, we draw focus to the breath. By doing so, we take ourselves away from the constant chatter in the mind. Also, by slowing the breath down, can help a person to feel relaxed. It can calm the central nervous system, which helps with feelings like stress and anxiety. And then when we add puppies into this, it just seems to boost everyone's mood. Everyone leaves smiling, happy, laughing. There's great feedback. And the puppies really seem to enjoy it too. So it's just an absolutely beautiful thing to do.
Working with ethical breeders, Paw Yoga gives the puppies a chance to socialise and have some fun before being adopted by their forever homes. Of course, it's great fun for the human participants too.
So if you're going to make any New Year's resolutions this year, I really recommend to try yoga. It's a really mindful thing that really helps with mental health, helps with physical health. There's just so many benefits. I could sit here and list all the benefits to you, but if you really just give it a try, you'll notice it for yourselves.
For some, puppy yoga could be the perfect way to start 2023. But for others, there's just no replacement for a good old-fashioned sweat.
During the Christmas period, people tend to sort of relax a little bit more, tend to overindulge, and then by the end of Christmas, they're like, you know what, I don't feel 100%, and then first thing that comes to mind is like, I just want to get moving again.
Over the last few days, the number of gym memberships is sure to have skyrocketed. But what advice did Joe have for keeping up with your chosen resolution?
Start small, don't overestimate what you can achieve. Do something small, little things you can do each day, and then that'll snowball into getting into that bigger picture, that bigger routine. It's the little things that you do that will get you the results that you're looking for.
No matter what your resolution is this new year, remember, it's all about finding the right balance. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Wise words, Sophie Reaper. I couldn't agree more. Now, let me introduce my panel to you again this morning. Political commentator Suzanne Evans is here, and former Labour MP Stephen Pound. Right, Stephen, this is all over the papers. Rishi Sunak is going to make his big speech this afternoon in about an hour, just over an hour's time. And what does he have in store for us? Compulsory maths until 18. What is he thinking?
So, let me see. The world's going to hell in a handcart. You know, we've got the possibility of a COVID one. The NHS is in crisis. We've got no buses, no tubes. You know, the border force are on strike. Ukraine's in a war. But we're going to make those kids stay on, even if they hate the idea, to actually do compulsory maths until they're 18. And I think there's something really phony stuff. I mean, forgive me for saying so, but this idea just doesn't add up because... I'm sorry.
You've been dying to use that line, haven't you, Stephen?
Look, I'm sorry, but there's a couple of obvious things here. They say that it's still the most popular A-level. Well, it's only because English is split into two that it is. If English was just one, that would be by far the more
because
popular.
It's literature or language.
Indeed so. Whereas maths, you know, you don't have stats, you know, whatever. So, look, I think that the point is that who's going to actually do the teaching? Because if you're going to actually increase this, a lot of people aren't going to want to study this. So you need a special sort of teacher to actually persuade someone to learn in an area that they do not want to learn. A lot of people simply do not want to do maths. And in my day, when we had slide rules and we had to do the whole thing was much more mental. Nowadays, people of your generation, you don't do that. You whip your computer out.
Absolutely.
Or your mobile phone, which is a computer.
This was on the radio this morning. So just to give you an idea, I mean, I'm absolutely furious about this suggestion, because it's hard enough to get kids to do maths as it is already. Make them learn maths properly from, whilst before the age of 16. There's no repetition with it. They don't know anything when they come out. They don't know how to apply it in the real world. It was on the radio this morning when my 11-year-old was having a porridge, and she came upstairs and then she went, "Mummy, if I have to do maths till 18, I am leaving school at 16. Because she's the arty type. She's good with words, she's good with language. But Suzanne, what's he thinking?
I don't know what he's thinking. I think he needs to take a few extra history lessons, because I remember Michael Gove came up with this idea in 2014. He said that any child that failed GCSE maths should keep doing it until they got their GCSE, and any child that passed it should absolutely be made to go on and do it for A-level. And of course, it was a nonsense idea and it was dropped. So back to history lessons for you, Rishi.
Is he kicking sand in our eyes? Is it just don't look at the NHS, don't look at the strike, because we're talking about it, aren't we?
It is quite astonishing that we've barely seen hide or hair of the Prime Minister since he was appointed. And now he's come up with this. This is really the best he can do. Shocking.
You know, all I see when I see Rishi Sunak, I can't get away from him doing his 11 plus to get into Winchester, or 13 to get into Winchester College. I don't think he's grown up properly. I think he's had these very pushy parents who've impressed upon him the importance of maths and English. The real world is not like that, Rishi Sunak. It doesn't really matter if you're going to be doing
I must admit,
maths
maths is not my strongest subject. I think I got a B at O-level. I wasn't brilliant at it at all. And I learnt far, far more about maths and actual practical maths than I did working on a market stall for my auntie.
Do you know what I would support?
In the days before calculators.
If you want to make anything compulsory whilst in education, make English compulsory, because we all have to be able to write good emails, write good contracts, write good statements, write a decent flipping text message.
But English is
that's a skill.
English is our great global benefit. I mean, the fact that 2/3 of the world speaks English, we should be able to speak it better than anybody else. In every single French embassy everywhere in the world, they have somebody, from the French cultural department or the cultural attaché promulgating French culture. We don't do that, but we should. But isn't it? I thought what's interesting about this thing? It's in all the newspapers, mostly on page 16, 17, 18, 19, except one paper. Front page, main story, the splash on the Daily Telegraph. Now,
And they're supporting it.
Yeah, but they've got the splash. Everybody else has got it tucked away.
I mean, I think...
Well, what does that tell us? That tells us that the Telegraph is very much on
We
side.
already have maths. I think there are plenty of other things we could be teaching our children. One of the things that I've constantly been concerned about is the fact we don't teach our kids life skills. We don't teach them how to cook, how to budget, how to tackle debt, how to apply for a mortgage, how to write a CV, how to run a home, how to do basic DIY. I think these things are far more valuable than forcing children who don't have the aptitude for it, don't need it, and don't want to do it.
It isn't a vision. This is my problem. Give me your vision for education. Education needs ripping up and starting again. It is an exam factory, isn't it? That's what lots of education secretaries have said for years, but nobody has the gumption to change it.
Well, it is like a sausage machine. It just grinding
really
people
is.
But I think
people like Rishi Sunak do well in that system.
More and more parents are homeschooling now.
I know. But wasn't it interesting? You just used it's the aptitude. I mean, I was actually become a product of the old grammar school system, and because it was before secondary modern. And when I took the 11 plus, there's a guy called Ilted Harrington was in charge of education at the London County Council at the time, and he said, "Don't feel so happy, son, because you realise that you had a 20% markup on your pay." I said, "What do you mean I had a 20%?" He said, "Because if the 11 plus in London had been marked blind, every single grammar school in London would have been girls only."
Yeah.
Because girls actually...
But I would say, actually, with maths, boys...
Well, I was coming on to say that. And this is the unfairness of it. Because in terms of actually doing 11 plus, sort of general intelligence, girls were so far ahead that the girls used to get marked down. As I said, I went to a grammar school, and it was, a boys' grammar school.
Is that why I failed the 11 plus? Because I was marked down.
But did you take it in London?
No, I didn't. I took it in Shropshire, and I didn't know I was taking it. That's my excuse. I thought it was just another mock, so when I came across a couple of sections I wasn't quite sure how to tackle them, I left them blank, and the first thing I knew was that my head teacher told me I'd failed. I was furious.
Let it go, Suzanne.
You got the difference.
Many years ago.
Listen, the Daily Express, page 6, 9 police officers a day in the UK are applying for jobs in Australia. Can't say I blame them. But it's not a very good indictment of our police service.
It's actually extremely worrying. We've already seen a massive exodus of doctors and nurses from the NHS going to Australia, where they clearly have better terms and conditions and better pay. And now it looks like we've got the same problem with the police force as well. It is deeply worrying. And this is something that the Home Office obviously needs to address as a matter of urgency. However, I have to say, Beverly, and rightly or wrongly, maybe you'll castigate me for this, but my first thought when I saw this story was, my goodness, I can remember seeing how the police in Australia behaved over COVID lockdowns. Yeah. They were thugs. They had no hesitation to use rubber bullets. They dragged people out by their hair. They beat up kids. They forced teenagers into masks. It was utterly brutal. And I have to say, there was a part of me that actually thought, rightly or wrongly, if police officers in this country want to go and join this kind of police force, then maybe Australia's welcome to them, because perhaps we don't want these thugs in our...
Well, there's two separate issues here. One is, with obviously the police numbers going by 20,000 between, 2010 and 2020, there's an issue where it becomes an accelerating programme. If there's less police officers, the ones who are left have to do more work, they get more fed up. But I actually know 2 Australian police officers who've come to the UK. I was chatting to them about football the other day, and they said the trouble with Australia today is you're either floods or droughts or forest fires. It's in a terrible state, Australia.
Let me tell you, though, this is quite extraordinary, that the police officers in Australia get a £47,000 starting salary and they get a free house.
Sorry,
we're just not looking after our police properly.
Hang on a second. It's where you go, because the problem with Australia is you have the conurbations. You've got the Perth, Sydney free, but they're trying to get people to actually come out to Woollumbolla Bay or
it sounds lovely on a day like today. It sounds lovely to be in Woollumbolla.
No, that's Flying Doctor to Woollumbolla Bay.
Okay,
horses wouldn't drag me.
We got to the end of our first hour, guys. We're going to be right back with more after a short break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Very good morning. Welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News. We're going to be dropping into the Reform UK press conference shortly. Their leader, Richard Tice, friend of our show, in fact, will set out the challenges faced by the nation after 12 years of Tory control. Rishi Sunak is set to deliver his first domestic speech of the new year in about an hour's time, vowing to ensure that every student in England will study some form of maths until at least the age of 18. Can you do something about the NHS, please? I'm also going to be joined back at the studio, at the breakfast bar, by my brilliant panel, Suzanne Evans and Stephen Pound. That's all coming up after a look at the latest news.
Hello, good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister is to announce plans for all pupils in England to study some form of maths until the age of 18. In his first speech of 2023, Rishi Sunak will lay out his priorities for the year ahead, including reimagining our approach to numeracy. He'll argue letting children into the workplace without maths skills is letting them down, as their future jobs will require more analytical skills. School teacher and maths ambassador Bobby Seagull says there's a significant need for increased focus on numeracy.
One of the headline stats that the Prime Minister talked about was that there were 8 million adults in England, that's 1 in 2, that had the numeracy skills that we'd expect from an 11-year-old primary school child. And that's where I think is the key failing. You might have passed an exam at 16, but 10, 12 years down the line, when you get your mortgage bill or you get like a bank statement, do you understand what's going on? So I think it's translating the math skills on paper to real life numeracy application.
Railway lines are closed with only a fifth of services running as 40,000 rail workers strike again today. RMT members across Network Rail and 14 train companies are on day 2 of a 48-hour strike in a dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Train drivers in the ASLEF union will strike on Thursday, followed by a second 48-hour RMT strike on Friday. RMT boss Mick Lynch told us this.
The message is that we do apologise for the inconvenience and we are working towards getting a solution. But there are a lot of people that are frustrated. We've got the health workers, education workers, firefighters are all getting the same treatment from the government, that they seem to want to extend the agony and not give people a square deal. And all we want is a square deal for our members, and then we can create a settlement.
A British man has been shot dead in Jamaica in St James. Sean Patterson, a personal trainer from West London, was found with gunshot wounds by the pool at the guest house where he was staying on Monday. Local media say a man is now in custody. Well, let's cross now to Westminster, where we can hear from the leader of the Reform Party, Richard Tice, who is to outline
What's the Prime Minister's
plans,
big plan?
tackling big issues.
Well, unbelievable. He wants to give maths lessons. I'll be touching on that a bit later. But let's look at the prospects. A new year should be a time for new hope, new ambitions, new aspirations. It is, of course, a time when you think about what's our potential as an individual, as a family, as a community, and our potential as a country. And we should, of course, be a successful nation, lowly taxed, growing fast, a high-growth economy. We should have high-quality, prompt public services, giving great outcomes. We should have cheap energy. After all, we're sitting on trillions and trillions of pounds worth of our own energy treasure.
Yeah.
We should have zero waiting lists, of course, with our healthcare system. We should have efficient government spending.
Is Bev picking up?
No wasteful government spending. And of course, we should be smartly regulated, particularly post-Brexit. And all of these things are within our gift as a nation. But all of these things require leadership, bold, clear decision-making. No nonsense, no waffle, no spin. It's all doable. But what have we got instead? Well, we've had 12 years of government by various incarnations of what I call the con-socialists. Taxes, the highest for 70 years. Government spending, the highest for about 50 years. Inflation, the highest for 30 years plus. And productivity collapsing everywhere. The lowest for at least 30 years. And then there's the strikes. Who isn't striking at the moment in the public sector is probably the right question to ask. The strikes at levels we haven't seen since the 1970s. And I touched on energy. We've got so much treasure within the UK territory, and yet we've got the highest energy prices ever. That's literally making the nation and all of us poorer and colder. Just think about that. We've got our own energy that we all own as a nation, and yet we're poorer and colder because we're not using our own energy treasure. And then finally, NHS waiting lists, the highest ever. People have come to accept waiting lists as the norm. When I talk about zero waiting lists, people look at me as though I've walked off Mars, for heaven's sake. Seriously, most Western nations don't have waiting lists. The Prime Minister this afternoon is going to re-announce the ambition that you can see a GP within 14 days. I was recently in Australia and I talked about this supposed Tory ambition. They laughed at me. They said there'd be riots in Australia if you couldn't see a GP within a day. We have to lift our aspirations. We have to lift our ambitions. We can do this, but it requires leadership. It requires real reform. And you look at that list of what's going on in the UK today, and you can draw one simple conclusion. After 12 years, the Tories have broken Britain. They have literally wrecked our country. It's not their country, it's our country, and they've broken it. What works at the moment in broken Britain? Public services, the NHS, railways, Royal Mail, Border Force. What's really working? Immigration, completely out of control, as admitted by the Home Secretary. She admitted that they've lost control of our borders. Surely one of the most important things that a government can do is to maintain secure borders, to know who's coming in and who's going out. They kept saying that one of the Brexit advantages that many of us fought for so hard was to take control of our borders. But now the Tories have completely abandoned it. Nearly 46,000 illegal migrants coming across the Channel. Over 1.1 million additional people coming into the country on a gross basis in the year to June 2022. Law and order is completely collapsing up and down the country. And tragically, you see that in just completely random murders with guns, with knives in the festive season. The charging rate has literally slumped in the last few years to just 5.4%. That's charged, that's not convicted. So criminals know that the real likelihood is that they will get away with whatever crimes they are committing. Drugs gangs taking over our town centres and our cities, laundering their money, their vast profits. It's all completely and utterly out of control. And then we've got a record number of people on out-of-work benefits, some 5.2 million people. It's the highest ever. It's 1.5 million more than pre-COVID. And on top of that, there's another 2 million people on in-work benefits. That's essentially where businesses are being subsidised to keep pay at low levels, and they're being subsidised by the taxpayer. Where's the common sense in that? And yet, despite all of this, despite so many people who are trapped on benefits, big business, the multinational corporations, and their lobbying group, the CBI, what do they want? Do they want to train our great young people? Do they want to get them into work, to help them, to motivate them? No, they want to abandon them and just import ever more cheap overseas labour. They don't want to train up, to skill up our own young people. It's a complete reckless abandonment of young British people. All of this, after 12 years of Tory rule. There's no question They have literally broken Britain. This graph here sets out the number of people on out-of-work benefits, actually since 9 years ago, 10 years ago, back in 2013. And you can see we're over 5 million people on out-of-work benefits. And yet we're told there's a labour shortage. And that's why big business wants to import ever more labour, cheap labour, from overseas. Surely the right thing to do is to help get our own people back into work. So who can fix broken Britain? Well, the Tories have been in charge for 12 years, and they have broken things. You know it's bad when people come up to me and say, Richard, I've got people who are literally resigning to go on benefits. You think something is fundamentally wrong. And the Tories have got literally no answers at all. But we're about to hear this afternoon from the Prime Minister his big answer, his big solution to those challenges that I've laid out in Broken Britain. What is his solution? More people should do maths until the age of 18. How many decades, Rishi, is that going to take to help people, to help our country? There's only one calculation that needs to be talked about, Rishi, and that is this. What is the answer when you've got a crisis, plus a crisis, plus a crisis? Let me tell you, we've got a national emergency. We've got a country that is broken. That is the answer to that calculation, Prime Minister, and you don't seem to have any solutions. You're going to talk about some plans for the NHS, but it's just a rehash of what we've heard before. We're the only party who's put forward bold, radical plans. Now, you might ask yourself, well, what solutions has the Labour Party got? Well, that's a very good question. I've asked people. The only thing they can think of is, wow, they want to put VAT on school fees in order to close a bunch of independent schools. That's not going to deal with any of the crises in broken Britain that I've just mentioned. So Labour have got no solutions, but Reform UK have. We're the only party that knows that we've got to make Britain great. But to do that, you've got to make Britain work. And in order to make Britain work, we've got to make work pay. Surely that is logical. And what's happened is that the tax levels at the moment mean that for far too many, actually working isn't paying. And that's why I say you've got people literally coming up to me and saying, why are people resigning to go on benefits? 1 in 8 of the working age population today are on out-of-work benefits. The two main parties don't want to talk about this. There's no discussion, no debate whatsoever. It's a complete abandonment of some of those in the greatest need in our country. Low pay and high tax means that too many people who want to work are actually being trapped in a spiral of being on benefits. And that is an absolute tragedy. Now, as we've grown in the polls and we've got momentum, more and more people, the media, are starting to pay attention. But our key economic policy has been the same since day one, since we launched Reform UK, and that is, in order to make work pay, we've got to dramatically change the threshold, the starting point, at which people start paying income tax. Now, the average salary is around about £30,000 a year, and yet people are paying income tax from £12,500. And the Chancellor seems to think it's a good idea to freeze that threshold level out into the ether until 27, 28, that sort of time. I say no. We've got to make work pay. And that means you lift the starting point from £12,500 to £20,000. That's still about 2/3 of the average salary. And let's remember, when income tax was introduced, by the way, as a temporary tax, hundreds of years ago, it was supposed to be a tax on the rich. But it's now become a tax that hits the least well off, the lowest paid, the poorest, the most. If we do that, if we lift the threshold, the starting point, from 12.5 grand to 20 grand, that frees up 6 million people from paying any income tax whatsoever. That's about 30 quid a week. For people on low incomes, that is a significant difference. £1,500 a year. All of a sudden, the scales drop from people's eyes, and you can say, yes, I can see how you make work pay. And then you see what happens, the attraction to get people off benefits. Now, the cost of this, of course there's a cost to it. On a net basis, it's around about 40 billion a year. But no one's talking about the fact that it's much less inflationary if you lift the threshold at which people start paying income tax than the current debate, which is all about how much to increase the gross salaries. So, for example, an average nurse, if you lift the income tax threshold to 20 grand, that's about a 6% net take-home increase for the average nurse. 6%. Now, the nurses are asking for 19%. So you can suddenly see that actually you're making a real significant difference, and that it's much less inflationary to lift the starting point for paying income tax than it is to increase gross salaries. And that's why on our healthcare plan that we announced back in December, we're saying that all of the frontline health and social care workers, all of them, should pay 0 basic rate income tax for the next 3 years. Just think about that. And I set out how to pay for it. That would help retain staff, it would help solve the current strikes, and it would help bring staff back into our healthcare and social care. We all know the problems in the healthcare system. We're the only people with a big, bold, radical solution. And if we lift the income tax threshold to 20 grand, all of a sudden, for those on low pay, for those on benefits, it pays to go to work. And we have to have a proper debate and to come up with real ways to motivate, to train, to enthuse. I say, let's set a target. Let's get 2 million people who are currently on out-of-work benefits into full-time work. We know there's a labour shortage. So let's use our own great people rather than import people from overseas. Let's train them. Let's enthuse them. That surely is the right thing to do. It's an absolute tragedy of wasted talent for the individuals themselves. The extra dignity, feeling of self-worth, achievement, earning to put food on the table, to pay one's own bills, is huge for them, their families, their children, their communities, and therefore, of course, for the country. And if you got 2 million people off out-of-work benefits back into work, then there's a massive, massive saving on our benefits bill. It's in the order of 30 to 40 billion pounds a year. Now, it's not going to happen overnight, but with determination, with the right focus, with the right effort, with the right motivation, we could achieve that. And let's be ambitious and say we achieve that on a 2-year time frame. So you can see that if we make work pay, all of a sudden we go a huge way towards helping resolving the current cost of living crisis, why so many people are thinking about striking or being forced to strike. We can get people back into work, which is good for them, for their own health, their own families, and good for the country.
Welcome back. That was Richard Tice there, talking at Westminster this morning, the leader of the Reform Party. I want to get a response from my panel, Suzanne Evans and Stephen Pound, of what do you make of Richard Tice and his ambitions, Suzanne?
You see, I really like what the Reform Party stands for. I like their policies. I don't like their presentation. I think that was quite a dull speech. I agreed with almost every word that Richard said. But there's no kind of va-va-voom there.
Do we want va-va-voom?
Well,
Did we have enough of that with Boris Johnson?
I'm sorry, I think politics is not just about policies, it is about personalities. It's sad but true, it shouldn't be, but it is. And, I didn't hear a single joke, I didn't really see much smiling, I didn't see him trying to really embrace his audience.
I think he looked quite nervous, actually. I think he looked
Perhaps
a little
he
nervous.
was, but then I'm sorry, if you've got to have nerves of steel in politics. Absolute
right.
nerves. Stephen knows this. And if you haven't got that, then maybe it's not the job for you.
Now, of course, Richard Tice was a Conservative Party member until 2019. I mean, he's cut and paste Conservative man, and he stood there in his blue tie, and a lot of what he's talking about, Stephen, is good old-fashioned traditional conservatism. I mean, it will be popular.
Well, I have no doubt that it will, and he's obviously got a good chance. I think it's in Hartlepool that
yeah, I think that's where
he stood last time, and he's announced that he'll probably stand there again. But look, content good, presentation poor. The background, the blue, blue, blue. I mean, you can see whose votes he's trying to mop up.
Understandably.
Yeah, well, I think he could do it. I mean, the point is that they're up about 9-10%. That they're approaching the stage where if they go above that, then they start to be serious contenders.
Now,
At the moment, they're not.
How they were selling that was in the latest stats. I think it was a Matt Goodwin, a piece of research, that Reform were on 9%. The Tories were only on 20%. So they were headlining that as we have at the moment. We will get half as many votes as the Conservatives.
Doesn't give you half as many seats, though.
It doesn't. It doesn't. You're absolutely right. But Labour then, at the time, on 47%. When, Suzanne, or if, how could they become genuine contenders? What would they need to do?
Well, I think it's a bit like, of course, Reform is actually an extension of the old UKIP, in a way. We've seen it started as UKIP, it became the Brexit Party, then it became Reform. And let's not forget that these small parties, UKIP is arguably, I think, the most successful political party ever because it actually achieved its primary goal.
100%.
It started out as a rabble-rousing new party to try and get out of the European Union, and it achieved that. But it did it by snapping at the heels of the Conservative Party. And when it got to a certain point in the polls, above that 10% point, that's when the Tories started to panic. That's when David Cameron promised the referendum. That's when the whole thing started tumbling. And
well, here's a question that I would ask, and no doubt he's very prepared to answer this himself on GBNews this evening. But would Nigel Farage be an asset, a public-facing asset for the Reform Party?
You see, I have huge admiration for Nigel Farage and everything he's achieved. The problem is, and he said this himself, he is Marmite.
Yeah.
You either love him or you hate him. So I'm afraid he's always going to have a kind of a point at which he tops out in the polls, and he's not going to get beyond that, I don't think, to be able to ever be Prime Minister and lead the country.
I was wondering where Nigel was. I mean, Nigel Farage
He presents a show on this.
I know he does in that part. I know
Very
perfectly
good,
well.
excellent, brilliant broadcaster.
He poured me a pint one night.
Oh, that's nice.
And a chaser. But look, in some ways, Nigel Farage is the most successful politician of the last 25 years.
Yeah.
To come from nowhere to where he came. On the other hand, he's one of the most unsuccessful politicians. He stood for Parliament, 11 times or something? He's never even come close. I think we need to see a bit more of him. From a Labour point of view, I'm born, I'll be Labour till I die. It just happens to be what I am. But I want to see a bit of diversity. I don't like the idea of having massive majorities. And I think, in all honesty, we're actually moving into an area much more of retail politics now. I mean, everybody knows in the 50s, 96% of the votes cast were either for one of the two parties. That's every year that's gone down, We now have a Green MP, we've had independent MPs. There's more of a change taking place. And I think that the old loyalties, my father voted Labour, therefore I voted Labour, doesn't apply anymore. If Richard Tice could actually, sort of get his game up a little bit and have a little bit of Farage in there somewhere. I may disagree with 99% of what Nigel Farage says, but as a retired person, I quite admire the way he presents it.
It's hard to put sometimes to distinguish at the moment between Labour and the Conservatives, and actually Reform was quite different. Talking about tapping into the natural resources, people will say it's a nostalgic, perhaps a nostalgic kind of vision, but anyway, right, we've got to move on. No doubt that we'll be talking a lot more about that.
Fracking's not nostalgic, it's the future.
Well, yeah, there we go. Right.
There we go.
Listed buildings. You've summed that up. Well done, Stephen Pound. Right, listed buildings. Kevin McLeod from Grand Designs, it's a bit of a gear change, isn't it? He has been calling for a new Grade 3 listing classification to protect millions of Britain's most iconic structures from demolition. As one of Britain's most iconic structures, Stephen Pound, what do you think about this?
I could do with the preservation order on that. We had a problem on my patch. I used to chair the planning committee in Ealing, and we had a Norman Foster building there, which was like a box of licorice, all sorts. It had a multicoloured green and blue and yellow little tubes. And I made the mistake at the public inquiry of saying it's more like Norman Wisdom than Norman Foster, which, you know, just as a casual throwaway. Anyway, the hordes of hell were unleashed at me, and, you know, I was told I was dreadful Philistine and everything. And, of course, they listed the damn thing, and because it's empty, nobody... Just up the road at the old Glaxo factory, there's a great brutalist concrete block, which was used for vivisection. And because it's brutal concrete, and it's a bit like Goldfinger's Trellick Tower, it's now got a preservation order. I think we need to be a little bit sensible about that. We shouldn't preserve the past in aspic. There's certain things we should keep, obviously, but there are other things, particularly the more recent stuff. I mean, do we really, really need to keep some of these dreadful buildings that have been thrown up in the last 25, 30 years?
Yes, I do.
Yes,
Stephen, what
go
a
on,
Philistine you are. I love Trellick Tower. I think it's brilliant. And I think, actually, it's a really good example of why we need to preserve history. Look at that mid-century building, mid-century furniture. Everybody hated it. They ripped it out of their homes. Now it's become popular again.
Is Trellick Tower the one in Ealing, then? Is that what you're
No, it's on the A40. It's
near Islington Way, isn't it? Yeah.
No, it's not as far down. You can, as you come in on the A40, it's actually in Westminster.
Fabulous, iconic building.
And it did have the architect had a character in a James Bond villain named after him, wasn't he?
Well, there's a story about that, but it'd probably take too long to explain.
Oh, no.
Anyway, but there's. I think this is a great idea. I'm absolutely with Kevin McLeod on this. I'm currently converting a Grade 2 listed barn.
Oh, wow.
In Shropshire.
You're brave.
It's a massive job. So I really appreciate the attempt to save and restore listed buildings, and this is what I am trying to do. But I have to say, it is at vast expense, and this is, I think, where we need to bring in some new policy here. There used to be a policy that if you were doing repairs to listed buildings, you only paid 5% VAT. That was scrapped, even though you had to jump through all kinds of hoops and you had to rebuild things exactly as they were to maintain their historic character. So I think owners of listed buildings could do with a little bit more support.
Yeah.
I am literally having to spend tens of thousands of pounds on red tape because the building is listed. Again, I think that's a massive disincentive to actually restoring our heritage.
Because you don't resent doing it because you do believe
well, I do,
it
actually.
should be preserved.
I do believe it should be preserved, but I do resent having to spend money on bureaucracy instead of actually putting it into the fabric of the building. I do resent it. But this idea of bringing in a new classification of Grade 3 for lesser important but still nonetheless important buildings, I think is very sensible. I get fed up of walking down what were once beautiful Victorian streets of terraced houses in London in particular, and you see every single sash window has been ripped out and replaced with vile UPVC.
But that's because they're really noisy and windy, and
I know
wind
they are,
comes
but
through them.
I've just had, I have another Grade 2 listed property, again, expensive. I've just put in double glazed new timber sash windows.
They cost a fortune.
You can do it. Well, you shop around. I managed to get a good quote.
Oh, well.
But, shop around, but I just think that is fundamentally wrong. Our history is vital. The character of our streets, it's so important. We have beautiful buildings in this country. Our heritage it really is the envy of the world, and we need to preserve it.
Isn't that the key issue? Do we want to live in the past, or do we want to live in a warm, insulated future? And I don't see why we can't have a balance between the two. I've had a loft conversion in my house, and it was very difficult because I live in a conservation area, which unfortunately I brought in when I was on the council. But the fact is, you've got to actually work. I know.
Do you regret that now?
No, because but certainly on the Cuckoo Estate, where I live, it is a conservation area, so we have to actually have what's called continuity of street scene, where you have to continuous. But in reality, there has to be a balance. And I think you're absolutely right. Do we really want the wind howling through the windows and pumping up more and more heat, more and more energy? We've got to have a better insulated house. Is it beyond the wit of woman and man to actually have a thing which is beautiful and at the same time well insulated? And I think we fetishise the past too much.
You can do both. As William Morris said, don't have anything in your home that you don't know to be beautiful or believe to be beautiful or know to be useful. Yeah. I think that's a very good principle for everybody when they're doing renovations or decorating or whatever. And I think we need to abide by that a bit.
Well, looking at the state of my carpet after Christmas, It's neither beautiful nor useful at the moment. But anyway, little glimpse into my domestic chaos.
William
Right.
Morris is spinning in his grave.
Yeah, he would be.
Scott.
Looking at the beer splashes on my carpet after my teenager had the house to himself on New Year's Eve. But anyway...
Fatal.
Coming up, nearly half of disabled adults have had to cut back on energy use. This is a really sad story, actually. We're going to find out why after your morning's news. Don't go anywhere.
Good morning, it's 11:31. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom with the headlines. The Prime Minister is to announce plans for all pupils in England to study some form of maths until the age of 18. In his first speech of the year, Rishi Sunak will lay out his priorities for the year ahead, including reimagining our approach to numeracy. He'll argue letting children into the workplace without maths skills is letting them down, as their future jobs will require more analytical skills. School teacher and maths ambassador Bobby Seagull says there's a significant need for increased focus on maths.
One of the headline stats that the Prime Minister talked about was that there were 8 million adults in England, that's 1 in 2, that had the numeracy skills that we'd expect from an 11-year-old primary school child. And that's where I think is the key failing. You might have passed an exam at 16, but 10, 12 years down the line, when you get your mortgage bill or you get like a bank statement, do you understand what's going on? So I think it's translating the math skills on paper to real-life numeracy application.
Around half of Britain's railway lines are closed, with only a fifth of services running, as 40,000 rail workers strike again today. RMT members across Network Rail and 14 train companies are on day 2 of a 48-hour strike in a dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Train drivers in the ASLEF union will strike on Thursday, followed by a second 48-hour RMT strike on Friday. Food inflation hit a record 13.3% last month due to soaring prices. That's up from 12.4% in the previous month. It comes as the latest price index showed the overall shop price inflation eased slightly to 7.3% in December. A leading doctor has warned toothbrushes are becoming a luxury item as soaring costs are forcing families to buy food over a toothbrush and toothpaste. In an interview with the British Medical Journal, Dr. Camilla Kingdon says the state of children's teeth is alarming evidence of how the cost of living crisis is impacting children's health. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning, it is 11:35 on Wednesday the 4th of January. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. Now, the Resolution Foundation has found that around 48% of disabled adults have had to cut back on energy use over the winter period. The think tank has also found that those who are housebound or suffering limited mobility may be more affected by rising heating bills due to increased time spent in the home. So let's get more reactions from GB News viewer and listener Jack Milnes to find out how this is. Good morning, Jack. Thank you so much for joining us. I believe you suffer from chronic pain, I understand. So I guess day-to-day life is already difficult enough without having to worry so much about whether you're putting the heating on or not.
Yeah, well, I've had to turn the heating off now that the cold spell has gone. So I'm using, jackets and scarves to try and keep warm. It's life has just become a serious exercise in austerity, really. Trying to cut back on everything. Christmas pretty much killed me. Not just the cost of energy, but the cost of food, the cost of petrol for the car. Everything is just too expensive at the moment. I'm seriously into my overdraft facility. So the prospects for the next 3 months are just try and keep the bills down as much as possible, and hopefully come March when the help finishes, then I'll be in a position where I'm no longer overdrawn. So
Jack, I'm so sorry. It sounds just unimaginably hard, actually. Can you explain to us how disabled people often have greater demands for electricity and for fuel in the house, and what that kind of extra energy is needed for?
Well, it's powering you. I mean, it's powering my wheelchair. It's the bed, the chair is a recliner. Everything's electric to try and help me. So it's a serious impact. I mean, my hobby is woodworking. I can't do that at the moment because the cost of running power tools is just too exorbitant. So it's a case of just sitting and trying to stay warm. When you're just sat all the time, you get extra cold anyway. I've got some arthritis, and that's making my hands, when they get cold, I can't grip things. So I can't do my hobby. I can't do anything really. It's just a waiting game now.
I'm so sorry. It's just awful. And when you hear Rishi Sunak is going to make his kind of maiden speech, his biggest speech since becoming Prime Minister this afternoon, but you hear that one of the main headlines is that 18-year-olds are going to have to learn maths. How does that make you feel?
Sort of disappointed, I suppose. I've always been Conservative, but I can't honestly vote Conservative anymore to the extreme. I've put my name forward to stand for reform at the next election. I like what Richard Tice says. I like the policies, and I think we can be the next government within reform. Conservative values and putting the people first rather than their own self-interest.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Jack. I really appreciate you joining us because I just think it's an area that we need to understand and we need to focus on. We know we are the People's Channel, and it's wonderful to hear from you and the reality of these policies that we hear about and how difficult this is for people. All the best. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you very much, Bev.
Moving, isn't it? It's just extraordinary. Right, moving on. The chief negotiator of Network Rail has raised hopes that an end to rail strikes is on the horizon, saying that a deal with the RMT is now within touching distance. Our national reporter, Ellie Costello, has been looking at the knock-on impact of the worst rail strikes in 30 years.
Halfway into the first week of 2023, but already a familiar sight of strike action. Yet again, Britain has been left with a skeleton service on the rails, the biggest national strike in 30 years. This week presents 5 days of travel chaos. It starts with the RMT's 48-hour strike on Tuesday and Wednesday. As left, the Train Drivers Union walkout on Thursday, and a second 48-hour walkout by the RMT will come on Friday and Saturday. Today marks the 21st day of action by the RMT since June of last year. So, how are the British public feeling?
Yeah, well, I manoeuvre my way around. I got caught out last week, and I'm making sure I don't get caught out this time. I have a strategy in place.
Do you agree with the reason why they're striking, or?
Wholeheartedly.
It's going to be very inconvenient, and it's hurting the people. It's actually, I don't see the point. So there's other ways of trying to, get your point across, I think, rather than, hurt the people that use the services.
I definitely support the rail strikes. I support anybody striking for a better pay.
It's a blame game. Both sides say they are willing to negotiate, but there's no public sign of these talks actually taking place.
Get off the picket line, round the negotiating table, and let's get these damaging strikes to an end. There's a fair and reasonable payoff on the table for the people you represent, Mick. So let's get round the table and let's see if we can get the dispute sorted out.
If there's an invite, we'll be there today, tomorrow, or whenever it is that they want to get there. But there has to be a change. We've been hearing the same stuff for 6 months or more, that they want to facilitate a settlement. Well, they've got to prove that now.
It's estimated the rail strikes have cost bars, pubs, restaurants and hotels in the UK at least £1.5 billion in December alone.
It is a hugely challenging time for them, and for those that are in city centres, the rail strikes are undoubtedly hammering a final nail into their coffin as they see a big loss of revenue. They are the collateral damage of these rail strikes. It's unlikely that the strikes themselves will put them out of business, but that perfect storm of a cost of doing business crisis, soaring energy bills, food price inflation, wage rate inflation, and a cost of living crisis with a consumer downturn means that the businesses in the middle are struggling to survive. We've lost 2,500 over the last quarter. We anticipate we'll lose as many again in the forthcoming quarter.
The Nighttime Industries Association estimates that its members lost £2 billion in the month of December, usually a key time for the hospitality sector to gain revenue. They will now struggle to survive through a traditionally quieter month of the year. Ellie Costello.
Suzanne Evans and Stephen Pound are still with me. Thoughts on strikes, Suzanne?
Yeah, I think the rail strikes in particular are getting to the point now where they're starting to lose public sympathy in spades, I think. And I think it's becoming self-defeating in a way. These 5 days of strikes, when people are going back to work after the Christmas breaks, absolutely devastating for many people, who will just be thinking, if they can, we'll just carry on working from home. And of course, in the longer term, the more people that work from home, the less money there's going to be available for the railways. They're already subsidised to the tune of around £11 billion a year. We're already spending 47% of GDP on public services. How much more money are we supposed to inject into pay rises and so on and so forth for people who... And they want above inflation pay rises. Most of us aren't going to be getting that. Not by any chance, really. So I think public sympathy is probably coming to an end.
I think so.
Waning.
Stephen, obviously the unions are huge funders of the Labour Party.
Not the RMT, they don't touch us.
Right, OK. But so is there any politics being played here, though? I mean, this does make... All of these strikes do make the Conservatives look bad.
Yes, but equally, as you know, and I was around in '79, and one of the reasons that Thatcher came in was because it looked like we were out of control. And before that, Edward Heath and the miners. Remember who governs Britain? Well, Britain said, "Not you, mate." But so there is always that issue. But I think the issue of subsidies is a very, very important one. I think you're right to touch on it. Look, at the moment, I've got no objection to subsidies. Some of the most efficient transport systems in Europe have subsidy. What annoys me is subsidy being paid to private shareholders. Now, when we have a situation like Germany, France, Switzerland, where you have efficient railway systems, there are subsidies, but the money stays within the system. It doesn't get... you had a thing last week about the amount of money being paid out in dividends, not just from transport, but to China. If you've got a problem with your electricity now, you've got to speak French. So you've got to go and speak to Électricité de France, because there's no British Gas or British Telecom or anything like that. So look, subsidies by all means, but the situation we've got now is that we're in a zero-sum game. Both sides are saying we're not going to move on this one. Now, the government, on the one hand, is standing on the sidelines making these comments. On the other hand, they're saying, well, we're not going to get on the pitch. We're going to stay in the terraces, shouting and booing. We're not actually going to get there. Ultimately, the government is the lender of last resort. They are the people who pay, even on the London Underground. OK, maybe Transport for London, but Transport for London get their money from the government. The government cannot simply abrogate responsibility. They can't do a Pontius Pilate and wash their hands on this one. They've got to get involved. We're actually in a state now. You saw the figures for the hospitality industry. Hospitality industry took a kicking under COVID. This is the last thing they need. And I genuinely don't believe that the people on the Underground want to strike. They're not getting strike pay. They're suffering. The RMT has a very, very big war chest. We know that, but it's not inexhaustible. And I think the nurses will settle. I'm pretty damn sure they will.
I'm sure they will.
I think some of the transport, TSSA, who actually do this, the station staff, are settling. ASDEF could well settle. And I think the problem with some of the people around the RMT is it's not just the issue of the strike. It's the downfall of global capitalism. It's the end of the world. And, Mick Lynch saying, all I want for Christmas is a bit of socialism. Fair play.
We've got quite a lot of socialism at the moment in our high-tax economy that we're living under right now.
Well, it depends how you define socialism.
Well, yeah, it's quite.
As Jeremy used to say to me.
True. But when do you think, because I keep drawing to mind, we've had multiple people on this show who from the hospitality industry, and they've said we've got until February, March, and then we're done because we can't afford the electricity bills. We've got, PAYEs to pay. We've got pension. We've got all of these. Our costs are still going out, and the gas and electricity bills for the pubs and the restaurants are just so crippling. This is going to have a massive impact on that as well.
It is. I mean, funny enough, I
think that's right. I mean, the fact is, hospitality, I think UK Hospitality reckons that these strikes are going to cost the hospitality industry 200 million alone just this week. If businesses go out, the tax revenue isn't coming in, the government hasn't got the money to spend. I mean, it's a self-defeating circle of doom. And I think the unions need to wake up to this and realise this. What did they expect when we shut down the economy for 2 years and paid railway workers, nurses, highways agency workers, border force to sit at home and do nothing?
What's interesting to see...
It was bound to happen.
Do you honestly think the Tories can come up with some anti-strike legislation? Because, I mean, you cannot force people back to work at the point of a ban. In the general strike in 1926, you had old Etonians driving buses, mostly driving them into walls, and I wasn't actually around in 26. But, ultimately, you cannot say even something like a minimal level of service. If you said to Mick Lynch and the RMT, you've got to have 20% of the tube trains running, who's going to choose which 20% drivers are going to do it? Those 20% of drivers, are they going to ring in sick? You've got to negotiate your way around. I mean, the point about collective bargaining, the clue's in the name. It's bargaining. There's got to be an element of give and take.
OK. Well, I think Rishi's idea, isn't it, is to bring in some kind of legislation that's going to introduce arbitrary mediation.
Well, Margaret Thatcher tried that.
It'd be interesting to see
if Margaret Thatcher couldn't make it work, I'm pretty sure that, the boy Sunak can't.
No. Right, food prices. Honestly, I just love to do this job with some good news one day. I'm sure there will be some. It's 2023. I keep looking forward. Cost of living, food inflation hit 13.3% in December. I remember Liam Halligan being in the studio with me before Christmas, and we were gasping at it being 10%, 13.3%. What do we do about this, Susanna? There's a big question.
Well, it is dreadful. I mean, we all go to the supermarket. We see how prices have gone up. What is it, over £2 now for a pack of butter? I mean, absolutely astonishing. And, it partly, I think, comes back to what I was saying before, earlier in the programme. We need to teach kids how to budget, how to keep household finances, how to cook basic food, because this is when those skills really come into their own, when you're in tough times like this. But that's kind of an aside. As I said, it was inevitable. This is a global problem. It's not just in this country. It's the war in Ukraine, it's energy costs, it's supply chains. It's happening across the world. To be fair, I think the supermarkets are doing what they can. Morrisons have announced today they're investing 16 million, slashing prices on 130 of their own brand items, and I know that other major supermarkets have done the same. They're doing their best, but it's a nightmare. And I was really struck by your interview with Jack earlier.
Oh, Jack Mills, the gentleman.
I think we can talk about this at a high level and talk about how dreadful it is, and we have the figures for inflation, but it hits people hard.
Yeah.
It really does. But, you know, what would I be doing if I was Prime Minister? I'd be cutting taxes. I'd be actually doing a lot of what Liz Truss wanted. I'd be encouraging growth. I'd be trying to get the economy moving again, because the sooner we can get the economy moving and try and avoid recession, the more everybody can have a better standard
of life. And fracking, I guess, Stephen.
Well, I mean, I'd bring that in tomorrow. It's insane. But we're actually importing liquid petroleum gas from America, which is now self-sufficient. I mean, back in my day, they used to have the United States Navy Reserve with oil all along the south coast, from Texas right to Corpus Christi. Nowadays, they've got so much because of hydraulic fracturing. But look, here's the thing. Waitrose, they're not doing very well at the moment, and you go to Waitrose, as I do, being a middle-class West London person, and, looking for Lemsip, which you cannot get for life nor money. It's people used to be selling drugs. Now they say, do you want some Lemsip, right? It's pretty tricky. Yeah. But on the other hand, just as there's a whole load of cab drivers out here saying, oh, I love this RMT strike, it's bloody brilliant. January used to be called the kipper season because it was flat. Now we're turning away the work. Equally, you go to Aldi, you go to Lidl's, they're doing really well at the moment. Now, if Morrisons can cut their prices by that much, why haven't they done it before? And what are we doing about British producers?
But do you think some people are taking advantage of this? I do think there's some shopkeepers are just going, everyone's expecting a cost of living crisis. Let's stick an extra 50p on that pint of milk. No one's going to notice.
No, I'm sure you're absolutely right. And Morrisons have got to make money. They've got to pay their staff, they've got to pay their taxes.
Well, Lidl's do, in fact, except they make the money goes back to Germany. Aldi, the money goes back to Germany. What's wrong? Tesco's was the great British invention. Marks and Spencer's a great British invention. Why can't we actually build on that? But I keep saying, why aren't we supporting local producers?
Yes.
Why are we flying lamb in from New Zealand?
Absolutely.
When we've got the best lamb in the world is in Wales. We're getting beef from Argentina. The best beef is from Northern Ireland. It's insane.
Now, talking of expensive things which might be considered a luxury item, how do you feel about divorce? A third of unhappy couples cannot afford to divorce. This is nearly 3 in 10 married couples feel trapped in a relationship because they cannot afford a divorce. 18% say getting a divorce is too expensive in the current climate, while 17% would not be able to afford to hire a solicitor. Chris Rudden, a digital wealth manager, Money Farm, commissioned this study. He said a divorce petition alone typically costs between £500 and £1,500, and that's before court costs.
Well, hang on. A lot of people can't afford to get married. I mean, my daughter got married. It was at the thick end of 10 grand, and there's a lot of people pay a lot more than that. I mean, I've been married since 1976.
Well done.
Well, it would have been 75, but Fulham got to the cup final, and we had to put the wedding off.
Well, congratulations. That isn't.
No, we lost 2-0 to West Ham.
No, not the football, Stephen. The marriage for all that time. That is an achievement.
Well, it is an achievement. As my wife always said, she's never thought of divorce, but frequently of murder. But look, the reality is that, yes, it does cost a lot of money for a divorce, but, what's the alternative? And I think we should actually look at the cost of a wedding. And, you can separate. I mean, there are issues to do with the possessions and the properties. The ultimate thing for me is I know a number of people who've just parted brass tacks. They've just decided enough's enough. You just separate the way. But most divorces I know are quite brutal, quite vicious.
They are. They're awful.
Particularly when it involves child custody.
Yeah, it's
That's where the money comes in.
Believe me, I've been through it. It's not pleasant.
I mean, a very wise friend of mine once said to me, she said, if you think a wedding is expensive, wait till you see how much a divorce costs. It's going to be 10 times more. And
Really?
I think she was absolutely right. A wedding actually doesn't have to cost a lot of money. If you want a big frou-frou frock and cars and bridesmaids and flowers and a huge reception, fine. But of course, you can actually marry very cheaply and very
Maybe
very
it should
simply.
be expensive, though, in order to dissuade people from taking
Well,
it
no,
lightly.
I wouldn't agree
We should say
with
the same
that.
thing about marriage.
I think people that say divorce is too easy, I remember an old boyfriend of mine, his parents hated each other. And every time we went to their house, it was hell, because he was the one that had the finances, as it's very even typical still today, and they were obviously a lot older. She couldn't afford to leave him, fantasised about leaving him, could never afford to leave him, and they were dreadful to be with.
But you can
those stories are
I mean, I've been paying him for my funeral plan for years. You can spend millions on funerals. I'm not going to be there, so I'm not that bothered about it. But in fact, Dennis Barry, the chap I've been paying the money into, said, Stephen, he said, you've paid up, you can't pay any more. We're going to give you a really good funeral and going to send your body back to Ireland. And I said, well, I've never actually lived in Ireland. And he said, are you sure? But I said, yes, my mother was Irish. So I imagine my coffin in Cork on the carousel going boom, 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 and nobody claiming it. What an end to my political career.
What an end to the show. There we go. Right, we have been asking you today. Rishi Sunak is going to announce his plans to fix the UK this afternoon. The headline that's making the news is that studying maths will be compulsory until the age of 18. Is it going to fix our problems? Our poll results have been finalised. 92% of you said no. This will not fix our problems, as opposed to 8% of you who voted yes. And I do know that 92 at 8 equals 100. And frankly, that's pretty much all we need to know. Right, we've come to the end of our show. It has flown by again. Thank you so much to Suzanne and Stephen. Coming up next is GB News Live with Paul Hawkins. I'm Bev Turner. I'll see you tomorrow.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here with the latest forecast from the Met Office. Drier for many today, but not for all. There is still some rain around and a strong wind, although that wind keeping things mild. It was a mild start to the day, especially in the south, and we've still got a lot of cloud across the UK, but a better chance of some breaks developing East Wales into the Midlands, East Anglia, North East Scotland as well. Now for North West Scotland as well as for Wales, there'll be some showers, but Northern Ireland, Southern Scotland and Northern England seeing the bulk of the rain through the day. However, everywhere is going to be mild, certainly milder for northern Scotland compared with recent days. Temperatures back to around average here, above average across the rest of the UK, 13 or 14 Celsius in the south. And those temperatures stay up overnight, along with this brisk breeze, although the wind does tend to ease during the hours of darkness. And the rain also eventually disappears overnight, with clear spells developing. Touch of frost for northeast Scotland, but elsewhere, it's a mild start to Thursday. A dry start initially for many, but these weather fronts are coming along. The warm front initially will be a weak feature. The cold front bringing more rain. For most places, that will be later in the day on Thursday. So we start the day with the cloud thickening in the west, some outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Much of this pushing northeastwards during the morning, and some places will miss it entirely. It's a very showery feature. However, for Scotland and Northern Ireland, here the rain turns heavier and more persistent later in the day, especially for western areas. And with a wind once again from the southwest, it's a mild day. 14 Celsius in London, 8 to 9 Celsius for Scotland and Northern Ireland. But it is a wet end to the day for Scotland and Northern Ireland. The wind picking up as well as this rain pushes through. And it's really during the hours of darkness again across England and Wales where we see the rain move through. And then it turns very windy overnight for Scotland in particular. Gales or even severe gales for the northwest. Saturday and Sunday, blustery with showers.
Sundays on GB News from 9:30, it's Camilla Tominey.
For a politics show with personality.
Then at 11, Michael Portillo.
For topical discussion, debate, some ethical dilemmas, and sometimes even a sense of the ridiculous.
And at 1 p.m, me, Alistair Stewart. Every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.